Hey, hello, welcome everybody, and welcome to the slightly late ComicBase Livestream. I'm your usually incredibly punctual host, Pete Bickford here, and as I try to pull up my show notes here, just trying to get things in order. There has been so much going on this week, you cannot, well, I imagine you could believe it, actually. But anyway, welcome everybody. Okay, so we got through that one, and okay, here we go. The big topic for today is obviously going to be the news about Diamond Comics Distribution declaring Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Before I get into it, do the usual bits of business. First of all, if this is the sort of thing that you're interested in, please hit that like and subscribe. It does help us quite a bit. We are slowly building the channel subscribership. And also, please give us a like over on Twitter or X or whatever you're calling it these days. To ComicBase or at Comic Software is our actual handle over there if you're searching it for it that way. And we try to post all the more breaking comic book and comic-based news there first, especially if it's the sort of thing that I can encapsulate in about 100 characters or less. We save the long discussions for this sort of thing right here, but that's where you'll hear the first things, the breaking stuff absolutely first. I also want to say hi to everyone in the chat here. Oro Viejo's first now's out here, relatively warm 29 degrees. I'm jealous of you. We're freezing our tuchuses off here out in Asheville. Scruffy's joining us. I'm not sure where you're from, but welcome. Gregory Hecht is here. Robbie Weinberg in the house. Mike Beam, Xanadu Comics from Seattle, and Ed's joining us. Great. Jet City Comics, Department of Comics down in Florida. My God, I was looking, and my neighbors down in Florida were telling me that they had 5 inches of snow, which I don't even understand it. Brian Stewart says, my temperature quadrupled today, but hitting a high of 18 ain't warm. -5 real air temperature. Whoa. Dr. Beat from California. Welcome, everyone. All right, so yeah, bit of news. Every time I go to Florida, in particular, every time I go to Orlando, something dramatic happens. The last time I was in Orlando for any length of time, well, I'll take that back. I was there one other time when I was looking at a house and decided not to buy it. The bartender in Tampa, when we were looking, we were trying to choose between moving out of San Jose. We were trying to decide between Nashville, Tampa, and Orlando, and saw a bunch of things in Orlando. A lot of things to be nice to be said about the city, but honestly did not vibe with it as well as we did Tampa and Nashville. And my wife and I were undecided, so we did the only sensible thing. When we found out that our bartender had lived in both cities, we said, well, which one would you rather live into? This is, we're having cocktails after a day of house hunting in Tampa. And he says, oh, no, dude, Nashville in a heartbeat. So it was like, okay, well, if you can't trust the bartender, where are you going to go? So then we moved to Nashville. And it's been good. But anyway, the time before that, when I went to Orlando, was on our grand 2008 cross-country trip with me and the family. We packed everyone in the car and took a month and saw the country from coast to coast. And right about as we got to Orlando, I got news from back in the office that our servers, as a matter of fact, I take that back. I was in the line to get on Space Mountain at Walt Disney World when I got news that our servers had taken a header and were suddenly blue screening when they tried to start them up again back at the office. And I was like, I will call you back. And then from that point, for about 3 days, we were doing a remote rebuild of the entire servers that we had in our racks back at the whole thing. One of the worst, most stressful times of my life. I'm literally thinking I'm going to have to abandon the family, fly back on the next plane. This is before remote access and things like that were nearly as sophisticated. But me and the staff back at ComicBase were like, up at all hours trying to rebuild a server rack. It was like, oh, just absolutely grueling. So if you guys ever wonder why I'm so paranoid about backups and redundancies and RAID and things like that, it comes from having touched the stove a few times. So anyway, but yeah, and so now Orlando, the thing that happened this time out is we got news on our first day down there. We're heading down to Universal. We're going to see the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, and we dipped a little bit south of Orlando is Cape Canaveral, and I actually saw a rocket launch, which was fantastic. I'll tell you more about that some other time, but But got news that Diamond Comics Distribution had declared a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, Diamond, as you guys probably know, is the one universal. Well, they were the one universal distributor in the entire comics industry. A bit of history. Back in the late '90s, there were traditionally two major distributors in the comic industry. There was Capital City Distribution and Diamond Comics Distribution. I mean, you could go way, way, way back, and you'd see Curtis and some other things like that. But for most of the independent market life, when there were independent comic books distributors, that was kind of the big two. Capital City, which was located out in Madison, Wisconsin, I think actually Middleton, Wisconsin, and Diamond Comic Distribution, which was in Baltimore. And this is going to become relevant to our story in a bit. Anyway, Marvel in the '90s got declared bankruptcy, had a number of corporate takeovers, before it was sold to Disney and things like that. They got very, very capitalistic in the big business kind of way of that. So every late '90s movie you remember seeing about Wall Street and things like that, think that kind of thinking. Very short term. They thought, we have the world's hottest creative properties and the whole thing, and we're just gonna make them big, baby. And they figured the number one thing they want to do with that one is, why are we giving these comic book people such a big piece of our money? We sell a copy of Spider-Man. Why should we have to spend this trade? Why should we have to split that with anybody? God damn it. So there was a distributor they bought out called Heroes World, and they thought, well, shipping comic books around, how hard could it be? So they announced that they were going to split off from Capital and Diamond, and they were going to do their own distribution, taking with them at that point, I think, about 45% of the market. Now, if you're in this little tight comic market, which I don't know if you guys have noticed, does not have a ton of extra money sloshing around in it. Your comic retailer is probably buying his books at, somewhere around 50% off retail. If he's a huge guy, he might be going as high as 56, 57% off retail. If he's a little guy, he might be buying as low as 35% off retail. But when you're selling basically a couple, at the time it was $1 and $2 books, my God, you got to move a lot of those little suckers to make, enough to keep the lights on. And it's an easy business for people to get into. It's a hell of a hard business for people to make a living at. At one point, the head of, I think it was like retailer relations or something at Diamond Comic Distribution, published a book which is so worth checking out. I have a copy called So You Want to Be a Comic Retailer. And it had, at the time, the best known stats for what the average comic store was actually making. And it was bracing. It was basically the average number of comic store employees is 1. It's basically the owner. The average number of amount he's going to take home at the end of the day was like $19,000. After a year of working, the average number of stock turns that he was going to be doing was like 0.6 or something, which meant it was going to take more than a year to move most of the things that walked through his door. I mean, it was just absolutely horrific numbers. It was the sort of thing that would take any normal businessman say, it's the last thing I want to do with my life. But God bless us, people who actually love comic books and love selling comics. I mean, my dream when I was a kid, I first considered running a business. I thought, hey, wouldn't it be great to run a hobby shop with my brother? I'm glad that didn't happen, probably. But yeah, and it's you want to work with the things you love, and so you're willing to give up a lot to be in that field, and so that's what most comic retailers do. Well, the comic retailers at this point, when Heroes World went over when Marvel went over to Heroes World, first of all, they of course immediately had to open up Heroes World account, which then, when it turned out about 3 or 5 months later, Marvel found out that, shipping comic books is actually really hard. There's so much to do, and there's things get busted up and damaged, and things have to hit at a particular place, and you have to ship them. They have to hit it on the same day all across the country, and there's relations with printers, and I mean, there's so much going on with the whole thing. They very quickly figured out we actually can't do this, and within a number of months, they actually had to say, yeah, no. But in the meantime, right during that 6-month period or so, when Marvel was like saying, no, we're going to run our own shop, the remaining two distributors, Capital City and Diamond, were left with, okay, well, we were barely making it beforehand, and now 40% of the revenue or 45% of the revenue in the industry just walked out on us. What do we do? And they very, very quickly figured out, we need to play musical chairs with the remaining big publishers. And so everyone went out and romanced the other big kid in town, that of course being DC. They were like the Bachelorette. It was like everyone's trying to give them the rose. Anyway, I think I have that reversed because I don't actually watch the show, but they were like the hot property in town. And at the end of the day, after a lot of romancing between the two sides, DC announced that they had decided, okay, we've decided to go exclusive with Diamond. So, all right, Diamond's at least got half the pie left, essentially in the whole thing. And that left Image, Dark Horse, Valiant, and a handful of other people fighting over 10-15% of the market at that point. Image decided they were going to go exclusive with, I believe, with Diamond at that point. And then the other guys, went hither and yon. But very, very quickly, a number of things happened. One, Marvel figured out that we can't actually make Heroes World work. We need to come crawling back. And they went crawling back. But in the meantime, Capital City says, we can't get by on like 15 or 20% of our old revenue because when you do comic book distribution, you have things like warehouses and trucks and, assembly, distribution points and lots of things that are fixed costs that, they cost you money regardless of how much product you're moving through them, stock space and carts and all the stuff. And so, if you cut 80% of the market out, you can't make that work. And so Capital City folded. They called it a day, and that left Diamond. And then when Marvel came crawling back from Heroes World, they said, well, I guess we have Diamond. And so then Diamond suddenly became the one major distributor left in the entire business. And so it continued for over a decade. I mean, it was for most of my comic running life, and at 1995, I think, we actually opened our own Diamond account because we decided as ComicBase that we were going to not just deal with comic books, we're going to have one issue of a series, we'll index it out, and we'll do what Overstreet does and, try to figure out the price on things. No, we were going to try to do something new that had never been seen at that point. We were going to try to publish in real time every comic book that was coming out so that you could actually download a list of the new things that came out, so that it transformed what you used to do with a database from, hey, I try to figure out what you're going to call the title next time and I'll add the next issue. And then when you publish your next yearly price update, hopefully I've made my title close enough to yours that you can reconcile the two. That was the way all this stuff used to work. And then around in 1995 or so, we released ComicBase 10, which we took on the burden of essentially buy one copy of every comic book that was published out in America. We would index it in real time. We'd publish out on the internet, and anyone who had our software could then download everything new that was going on. And then instead of entering their own books all the time, what you mostly do is you look up books and you say, hey, I've got that one. So it takes 99% of the data entry out of the process for the customers. So that's a big win. Makes it a real pain in the butt for folks on the inside who are trying to, we're scanning books, we're indexing stories, we're indexing writers and creators and all this other stuff, and scanning barcodes and all this stuff. But hey, 20 some years later on, I'm going to say it worked out okay. Well, in order to make that all work out economically, we opened up our own Diamond account. And so it used to be that I would actually drive up to the Hayward warehouse of Diamond Comics originally to get the books, and then we eventually figured out how to get them delivered to us. But we've been working with a cash-on-the-barrel Diamond account because, we never saw a need to have anything but cash. And we've been doing that for 20-some years with them. And that's how this has been continuing for us with them to this day. And we have, I guess, the same general experience with Diamond that most people have had. Most things get there on time. Their systems have tended to be a little bit towards the antique in terms of the customer ordering experience and things like that. I mean, they're not on DOS anymore, so that's good. But if you see, the people who on our side who are filling out the order entry forms and they're putting the order form in 10 lines at a time and then hitting next page and then they go to the next one. I mean, one can certainly imagine a more streamlined way of doing all these things. Diamond publishes this huge phone book called the Previews Catalog, which is actually quite terrific to see. It has, arts and descriptions of every darn thing that they're going to be, publishing this month, from all the different publishers, with a special supplement for the different specialty publishers, especially the ones that went their own way later on, like Marvel and then later DC. Oops, spoilers. But yeah, no, it's you could certainly wish certain things were more modern, but yeah, I'll admit I've worked with, say, the people on the inside of, say, Walmart or Amazon, and there is actually a certain aesthetic to the interior operations of those companies where they actually kind of pride themselves on being frugal. So Amazon famously made a big point, especially in the early days, of saying, yeah, no, I mean, the first desk that Jeff Bezos has was just a couple of sawhorses with an old returned, household door propped on top of it. And for a long time, that was the whole thing, where even senior management at Amazon would be given like desks made out of old returned doors just to make them keep their focus on things. Now, I have not been to the Amazon offices in a while, but when I saw them last time, I didn't see any doors. Let's just say that. So people do upscale. Walmart also famously, if you actually go inside the offices of the people who run Walmart, frugal as hell. They are not great offices. When you go up to the exec lunchroom, it's pretty good. But when you go up to like just the rank and file, business offices and stuff like that, no, it's pretty much generic Cubeville. But I mean, the whole idea is that the thought is we're not spending the money on the trappings. We're spending the money on delivering value to the customer. So I get the aesthetic, but also it's I'm going to say there's a lack of polish, and it shows. Also, a big complaint on Diamond, the other two big ones that people were complaining about in the past, is damages. And I was just entering comic books. That's why the show was a little bit late, by 30 seconds or so today. Because this is probably going to be one of our last Diamond shipments. And about, I don't know, I'm going to say about 20% of it was dinged up in some way, which is like, that's not great, guys, because every time you do that, someone's got to file up a damage report. You got to request replenishment stock to make up for the damaged up copy. As you know, and I know, the second I make a 1/4 inch non-color breaking bend or a 1/2 inch non-color breaking bend in a comic book, just all I gotta do is ding a corner, and I've reduced that comic book by 2/3 in its value. I mean, it takes next to nothing to destroy a comic book's collectible value. And with new comic books, especially with a critical audience made of veteran comic book collectors as opposed to a bunch of just kids at the candy store, hard to get away with that these days. And Diamond has always struggled with the fragile nature of comic books. Now, later on, much later, we go through the 90s, and again, Diamond, the big dog, it done, I'm gonna say, pretty good job, all things considered. They took their position as the one distributor in the business, and here I'm going to stand up for Diamond a bit. Steve Jeppy, who I've met, took his position as the one guy controlling the comic industry. I think he took it as a stewardship, and I mean that in the most positive possible way. He could have turned the screws on things. He could have reduced the accounts that he dealt with to only the most profitable ones. He could have saved himself a ton of money and a ton of problems. He could have said, "Look, any publisher that can't push 5,000 copies of a product per month, you're out. You're gone." I mean, that would have think of how that would have simplified Diamond's life if he essentially limited who he dealt with to a Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Image, maybe Viz when Viz got a little bit bigger, maybe Valiant, couple others, Tokyo Pop. You've been able to count the number of publishers that anyone had ever heard of on both hands, tops, and you would have done that just by enforcing things like a 5 or a 10,000 book per minimum across your entire line, across all the comic store accounts that he dealt with, but he didn't. He really made it so that you could get in pretty simply. I want to say you could get in with like an opening account of like $500 of monthly spend to open a Diamond account. I believe that was the threshold when we started, and I think that's the retail amount, which meant you're really spending like $300 of to keep that going. I don't know if that was per month or per week, but I remember thinking it's like, oh, hey, that's nothing. If we're buying one copy of everything, we're gonna make that in a heartbeat. But I also remember the first time I met a certain comics retailer, famed from the Midwest, let's say the higher portions of the country, say miles high. But I remember the very first time I actually met him in person, he was at a distributor meeting in front of a bunch of other retailers, talking, and he was forcefully arguing in front of the Diamond guys, why the hell are your minimums this low? The minimums ought to be like 6 times larger at minimum, because the whole problem in this industry is undercapitalized, comic stores who can't make a thing, and the weekend warriors and the people are coming in there without enough whole things, and we shouldn't have anything to do with them. You should absolutely prohibit them from having accounts on the whole thing. And I'm going to say, not coincidentally, had Diamond heeded his advice, 2/3 of the people present would not have had Diamond accounts. And so on one hand, you got to admire the chutzpah in that he's saying this right in front of their faces. But I also admire that Diamond says, you know what, we're going to give everybody a shot. And they kept that going, really, I think, to their detriment, longer than most businesses would have, in terms of letting marginal comic book stores. I understand they extended a lot of credit terms. I mean, it's typically the way this sort of stuff is done. We've always dealt cash, just because we never saw a reason not to. But with comic stores, inventory comes in, inventory goes out. Typically, you're running on a 30 or 60-day, payable kind of schedule. And so there are people who were behind that they kept on shipping product to when they probably shouldn't have. So Steve Geppi personally was carrying a number of comic book stores throughout some of history. And he also, there were publishers that were not moving a lot of product that he kept on and gave them a really clear shot at least having access to the comic market in a way that they wouldn't have without a comic distributor, at their hands. Because if you're just a guy with a comic book, it's really hard to reach out to at the time, 3,000, 3,500 comic book stores and say, hey, I have Mighty Guy #1. It'll be the greatest comic book you've ever heard of. Please buy some copies. And you're going to sell 50 copies. This was before the internet. This was before social media. This is before you could really go out, make a name for yourself outside of comic books, and then come in, to the comic book market and take it by storm with a Kickstarter. They offered smaller guys a way to get in, as long as you're going to move at least a few copies. I mean, they're not, interested in your kids, crayon drawings from first grade, make a comic book day, but it wasn't much, their threshold wasn't much above that initially. So, and I respect that, because who doesn't like cheering for the little guy, right? And some of those little guys were people like Robert Kirkman, who eventually did okay for himself over at, Image Comics. So, it's, you always shoot for the guys who you want to have a lot of different interesting voices in the market, even if a bunch of them can't really get it done. So Diamond did that, and they were working pretty well, all things considered, for quite some time. And then the big bad happened, the big bad being COVID. Now, it's relevant that Diamond is in Baltimore, because, again, I'm going to say there are factors at work. It's really, really easy to forget everything that was going on back then, unless you're kind of writing it down as you went. I think a lot of it, man, we don't want to remember the way it was, because, man, it was horrible. But depending on what the politics of your state was, you shut down either for a couple weeks or you shut down for many, many, many months. And how you shut down ranged from, hey, you got to wear a mask as you go inside, you got to walk down one-way aisles in the grocery store, nonsense like that, to no, there's no gatherings allowed for more than 5 people. And if your neighbors report you, we send the police. It really, it quickly broke down in the country, very close to red-blue lines. I mean, there was some crazy overlap on both sides, but at that point, it mattered very much that Diamond Comics was located in Baltimore, whose governor was not the very hardest lockdowner guy on the planet, but he was in the top bunch. He was not shy on the lockdowny part. So at one point, the word came down is that, we're not doing business indoors pretty much anymore. And you can't run the warehouse. You can't run the things. And Diamond at one point announced what I thought would be the greatest thing ever. The whole comic book industry was going to be taking 5, which is to say a couple, 3, however many months off. We're just not publishing, printing, distributing anything whatsoever. And I always thought, man, if you could just stop the flood of new stuff for a bit, I could catch up. It'd be great. to those of us who were alive during the whole point, we all probably remember that first week of shutdown where we all like reorganized our like sock drawers, and we finally cleaned out the bottom of the silverware drawer, and all the other things we meant to do. And by week 2 we were all day drinking and like just going out of our minds, right? It turned out it was not as great as we might have dreamed during the rushy days, whatever. But when things opened up, Maryland was not one of the fast opening up states. They were actually locked down for quite a while. And because of this, and because no comics were running through the Diamond Distribution Center, and because that was the only distributor going on, DC Comics, which when they had signed on for a exclusive agreement to be distributed by Diamond and Diamond only, they were the first people to say, screw you, man. We have had no revenue for like 3 months now. You are moving none of our product, and we are getting out of our contract at the first available opportunity. And so that's obviously this is not good news for Jeppy. In fairness to him, I don't know how much he could have done for, it's ambiguous, a month or 2, 6 weeks, somewhere in there. I mean, could he have locked down a little less than he was allowed to by his governor? I'm not sure. Honestly, if I ever get a chance to interview him, this would be an interesting question for him. But I noticed that all the people who are doing the retrospectives on him, they leave out the fact that the Maryland was a pretty hard shutdown state. And so I don't know. They say, "Oh, Jeppy closes warehouses." I'm not sure that was entirely his decision. So I'm willing to give him a bit of grace on this one, because I mean, like I say, depending on where you were, like if Diamond was located primarily in California, forget it. It would never have happened. If he was located primarily in Florida, heck, it would have barely ever shut down at all. But yeah, we were all very different in our policies on this whole thing. Unfortunately for Steve Jeppy and Diamond Comics, they were amongst the businesses that decided they were going to lock down for a long time. And DC, frankly, just lost patience. And so as soon as they were able to, they took their business, they moved elsewhere. Marvel also decided that they were going to look for other means of distribution. They launched a deal with Penguin Random House. DC went exclusive with 2 distributors, which were not Diamond. There was one, I even forget the name of them right now. They were associated with Midtown Comics. They were a new distribution arm. And honestly, it's another of those Heroes World things where it didn't last long under stress. It was a perfectly good comic subscription service. So when you got 1,000 people or 2,000 people ordering comic books, and it doesn't really matter if their stuff hits on the same day, that's one thing. When it's suddenly a whole bunch of comic stores where their product has to hit in bulk on the same day, it doesn't work. That one shut down almost immediately. I'm sure someone in the chat will point out. But the one that bore up under load was called Lunar Comic Distribution. Lunar had never heard the name beforehand, but suddenly we had found ourselves having to open an account with them because we wanted to be able to provide DC books, right? So Lunar turned out to be kind of good at what they did. I'm not sure what their origins are before all this, but they immediately impressed people with their ability to pack comic books to a standard that we hadn't seen before, to wit, almost nobody ever reported damages on their Lunar orders. And almost no one was, reporting that their Lunar orders were late. Lunar, matter of fact, could get their books out to you a day early. And so then we had the whole question in the comic industry was, well, do we have new comic Tuesday and Wednesday, or is it just Wednesday? I mean, do we have to delay these? This was some of the controversial points of the whole thing. Lunar also offered better shipping terms. Diamond basically charged you what it cost them. Lunar, either it cost them less or they were subsidizing that throughout their chain, whatever, but they were more competitive. And people said, man, I like what's happening with Lunar. I'm going to shift more of my order to Lunar when I can. Meanwhile, Marvel had struck up a deal with Penguin Random House. It was not exclusive. Penguin Random House, we know as the guys who dump all the Dogman books or whatever else. If you see people stocking at your local Barnes and Noble, it's the people with the big boxes of stuff out there just thunking books onto the shelf. And I remember looking at this thing thinking, anyone who's used to this being the way you distribute books around is never, ever going to be able to cope with comic books. But they've done kind of okay. They're not getting the same glowing reviews that Lunar did in terms of being damage free and things like that. But they are the only game in town. I'm sorry, they weren't the only game in town then. But in order to get to get your Marvel books, you either had to order through Penguin Random House, which gave you better trade terms, so you could get them cheaper. But I gotta admit, they were harder to deal with, to the extent with when we eventually figured out, well, do we need to open up a Penguin Random House account? We don't, to get Marvel books. We could still get them through Diamond. I don't really want to bring a new distributor into our lives, but which every time you do a distributor means I have to work out a new workflow. I have to ingest a different order form. We have to do different conversions of things. I mean, if I cannot do that, I think it's worth some money to me. But we looked into it. And honestly, Penguin and Random House was so difficult for us to deal with because of our structure, which is to say our content team lives in one state and the official address of the company is in a different state. And frankly, and where the comics will be when they're eventually sold to the public, because when we buy comic books, we ingest all the information, we scan comics, we bring them out to you as part of the database, but then we don't just hold on to them forever. We actually sell them out the back end on our Atomic Avenue store because we can't store all the comic books on the planet. Okay. We have ordered hundreds of thousands of comic books, since we first opened a Diamond Comic account, and I don't have that big a place. So we saw them on Atomic Avenue, which then for the purposes of sales tax was something that like blew Penguin Random House's mind. We provide them with a number of sales tax news certificates and everything else like that, and they just could not cope with it. And so they're like, no, if we ship them to California, we have to charge you California sales tax. And I'm like, we don't do any business in California. We just have some indexers who work there now. And they were just like, yeah, no, we can't. And so I was like, okay, fine. So that's why Human Computing does not have a Penguin Random House account as of today, because of just, they were not the most easy to work with folks on the planet for folks of our size. And our size, for the record, is that of a mid-sized comic store in terms of our total order. We're not the biggest, but we're not smallest by a long shot. So anyway, with all this going down, Diamond they're reliving the nightmare of the Heroes World thing. They've just lost 40% of the comic market with DC. Marvel has split their business now. Marvel is, you can still get them through Diamond, but you also can get them directly from Penguin Random House. Matter of fact, they had a very complicated relationship where they were reselling the Penguin, they're almost acting as a second distributor for Penguin Random House on graphic novels. More on that in a bit. But they're going to be in a tough situation. And then several weeks ago, they had another bit of bad news drop in that it turned out that Image also had gotten sick of shipping delays and other things that were happening with Diamond, and told them that, yeah, we're moving out. We're going to no longer be exclusive with you. And at that point, Diamond did not have enough left in the comic industry to keep the lights on. And people were kind of waiting and thinking, well, yeah, see, there goes Boom, there goes, IDW's sales are going through the floor and so forth. Everyone's kind of counting all the what little they've got left on their balance sheet in terms of comics. And I guess, it's both shocking and not shocking at all. Last Monday, we got the news that Diamond had declared that they were going Chapter 11. Now, Chapter 11 bankruptcy is not Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Chapter 11 is basically, it tells your creditors, hey, y'all can't collect for a while. We need to give these guys some time to work it out under the direction of the bankruptcy court. And then you try to establish operational funding during the whole thing. Diamond has established, I think, about $40 million through Chase Bank in terms of, I think it's called, debtor in place, DIP funding. But basically working capital to kind of keep the lights on for a bit as they try to work out their operations. But for the record, only 1 in 5 people who enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy don't eventually enter Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Chapter 7 bankruptcy is turn off the lights, sell the furniture, return whatever you can to the debtors, and they will get whatever cents they have on the dollars. Yeah, you have what's called secured debtors and unsecured debtors. And the unsecured debtors are the people who don't have hard assets in place that they can, call their own. They typically wind up with pennies on the dollar in bankruptcy sales, and it's not a good time for anyone involved. So with the declaration of Chapter 11, Diamond had to declare a list of their unsecured debts, and it was, not great. They owe something on the order of $40 million directly in unsecured debts. The biggest one that they owe, I think, about $9 million to. Well, actually, this is a good time to start looking at my notes. $9.2 million. Their biggest unsecured claimant, creditor, is Penguin Random House Distribution, of all things. And it's all those graphic novels that they were sub-distributing for that they apparently had not paid for yet. Beyond that was Bandai, a bunch of toy companies, actually. Bandai, they owed $4.4 million to. NECA, $2.6 million. Kin Molding, whoever the heck that is, $1.8 million. Todd McFarlane Productions, we know that name. Best looking action figures I've ever seen, $1.7 million to them, et cetera, et cetera. Disney Consumer Products, $1.7 million, et cetera. And it goes on from there. Basically, most of the ones that are under $1 million are comic companies. And let's face it, when you owe, Udon Entertainment, $202,000, Super 7, $163,000, Dynamic Forces, $217,000. These guys don't have the money to burn. It's like, if you just tell Dynamic Forces, oh yeah, hey, that $217K we owe you, you may not be getting it. That's not great news in your day. Now, when this happens, a number of things go on typically. If you guys have been in a Best Buy lately, you know the feeling. I certainly, if you remember Fry's Electronics, in its final days, you know the feeling. You'll notice the store shelves get emptier and emptier is the number one thing, because the people who are owed money to, or the people who think, I'm not sure if I want to be essentially extending credit to Diamond for, because I mean, like, let's say if I sell, if I were to sell ComicBase through Diamond again, what I'd be doing is I'd be shipping a bunch of product to them. Now, maybe ComicBase is not the best example, because ComicBase is one of those things where, like, all the money is in, all my cost is in the first copy of ComicBase I sell, because that's when all the R&D cost I spend for an entire year, it goes into that first copy of the next version of ComicBase. So the first copy is hundreds of thousands of dollars. The next copy is like $3, because whatever at that point, it's whatever the disc costs me, right? But for most other people, it's like, let's say I'm selling you action figures. If or I'm selling you, really cool busts or things like that. If I'm in that business and Diamond says, hey, yeah, did you want to list your new Sideshow collectibles things through us? And I'm Sideshow, and I'm sitting there going, let me get back to you. Because if I go and I put the new set of Iron Man faceplate busts through them, I'm going to ship, I'm basically going to put a solicitation. Diamond's going to say, all right, guys, I'm going to take some orders. And let's say that, $500,000 worth of orders for my busts come in. Well, Diamond will then say, okay, great, $500,000. The people will be now issuing assets into Diamond's account, $500,000, and then I'm going to ship however much it cost me to make those $500,000 worth of Iron Man busts and things like that. I'm going to now ship them over to Diamond, and Diamond's going to get, typically there's float, and it's usually in the favor of the person who's holding the money. But typically it might be things like, okay, my payment terms are net 30 on if I'm Diamond. So in other words, if you're not a cash on the barrel account, but this basically, if you want those Diamond, those Iron Man busts from me, you got to pay me in 30 days. Whereas if I'm the vendor, if I'm supplying Diamond, typical payment terms on that end of things are like net 90. And so just you might get that just on the float alone. And this, by the way, this is the entire underpinning of Amazon.com is that typically when you buy something on Amazon.com, Amazon's getting paid in about 7 days on average, but net 30 is the worst that ever happens to them. And if I'm a vendor selling on Amazon.com, net 90 is the typical. So just on the float alone of billions of dollars of revenue, you can run a pretty big business. And that is a large portion of Amazon's success. I mean, it's a large portion of pretty much any retailer's distributor's success. But anyway, if I'm going to do that one, I'm sitting there going like, well, so I'm giving you product that cost me a bunch of money, right? And of course, I had to then pay my vendors, whoever went into making the thing there. And I'm not going to see the payment on this one for some time. Well, that's okay in most circumstances, because I figure you're good for the money. But what if I know you're in receivership? What if I know you're in bankruptcy? Well, suddenly I may be sitting there going like, dude, I can't do net 60 or net 90 anymore. I got to switch you to cash, right? So if you want those Iron Man collectibles from me, or the Sideshow collectibles from me, I'm happy to sell them to you, but the second the thing leaves my lot, I better have had a check in hand from you, and the check better be good. And so that, in the meantime, screws up everybody else's things, because I'm not willing to send new product over to you if I think I'm not going to get paid back. You, in the meantime, can't sell anything unless you can get the financing to buy it, which that's where the working capital comes in for the most part. And it's a rare company that walks away from that situation. The other thing that happens when you're dealing with people in this sort of situation, think about if you're at the comic book store, right? And let's assume, for the sake of argument at this point, that the comic book store is okay. They're not floating cash. Let's say that they're like me. They're cash on the barrel with Diamond for whatever reason. They just they're graduates of the Ramsey School, and so they always do everything in cash, say for whatever reason, right? But one thing they're definitely going to be doing is they have to deal with things like, well, what's my cost of goods sold? Which, in other words, to say, if I sell you a copy of Moon Knight, or I sell you a copy of Iron Man, or that Sideshow collectible bust we were just talking about, whatever else, if I sell it to you for $299, I want to have bought it for a lot less than $299, right? Matter of fact, the less from $299 the better, because hey, I got the cost of running my store, don't I? So again, typical margins for comic books are around 50%. So if I'm selling you a $4 comic book, I'm paying about $2 to get it. Now there might be some shipping costs, there might be some other kind of holdover and carrying costs, blah blah blah. So but let's just say, to keep things easy, I'm making $2 on that comic book. All right, well, I'm making $2 on that comic book, but a number of things are going to influence my cost of that whole thing. Number one, my costs go up immediately the second I'm dealing with more than one retailer. We talked about that with ComicBase, where I didn't want to go to a lot of effort to open a Penguin Random House account, because I didn't want to do the new workflows. I didn't want to have to ingest new forms, which means I'm dealing with new contacts for reconciling shortages and damages and all the other stuff like that. It just adds more work. I don't want to do it. But the other thing it does, which is pretty powerful in the comic industry, is it splits your order. So a big part of your discount at different things is how much you're buying. So if I go through, say, Image comic books, through, I believe, the new deal with Lunar, and forgive me if I'm getting these exact numbers wrong, but they set a threshold. So like from the first $500 of product that I buy from Image, I might be getting that at only like a 35 or 40% discount. But if I can get my order up to like $1,000, $2,000, suddenly I get numbers that are more like a 50% discount or a 52% discount, things like that. And so obviously, if I can move a lot of product through the same distributor, that's better for me. Right. I don't want to split half the order through Penguin Random House, half of it through Diamond, because then I get a worse discount at both places, in addition to having all the paperwork involved. Well, so now we have the collapse of that in the other way. So let's say that Diamond has now, if you're a comic shop, become somewhat unreliable for you. And this is unfortunately happened immediately. It took less than a week after the bankruptcy announcement for Diamond to have to, between Diamond and Image, there were a number of emails that hit our inbox, which said things like, oh yeah, all that product you just ordered from Image through Diamond, yeah, you kind of may or may not be getting it. A little unclear. These guys swear you're getting it up to this date, and after that date, maybe not. Other people, you're getting a note saying, yeah, anything after this date, we're immediately canceling the order. You'll have to reorder it again from Lunar, blah, blah, blah. So now I'm going to admit, when they passed all this along to me and my ordering person asked me, what the hell do we do? I said, you know what? Let's just get through this month. So because again, it isn't like I'm going to lose 1 million customers if people come in for the latest issue of an Image book and one issue is late or missing, because I'll have the data, we'll fill it in, we'll get through the month. It's, this is chaos. We're going to get through a month, and if some of it's a little sketchy this month, that is why. And if I figured better than that than having 3 copies of every issue because we didn't know who was going to be shipping when, because that also happens. We have things where, personally in the whole thing, I have multiple copies of Vampirillas and things like that I'm not particularly keen on, because they got ordered through both of the places that carried, that publisher and the whole thing, and the ordering person didn't know which way they were coming in that month, so we ordered from both. But anyway, this is the part where I say, okay, I order like a comic shop, but I'm not a comic shop, right? My problems are different than your local comic shops. Whereas if your local comic shop, if you've been used to getting that issue of Spider-Man every week of your life, or whatever else, and you come in that Wednesday and it says, yeah, sorry, kid, we don't have it for you. There's a chance. It's not 100%, but there's a non-zero chance that kid says, well, screw you, I'm going to the other comic shop, or screw you, I'll start ordering it online, or maybe I just don't even like Spider-Man anymore. Hell with you all. That's a real thing that happens. And so you have a lot more to lose as a comic shop if your distributor becomes irregular. And it took zero time for the relationship, at least with Image, with Diamond and Image, to become irregular. So in that situation, what do you tell your ordering guy? When first of all, Diamond is instantly announced, oh yeah, by the way, our warehouse closures, the ones that were making us so popular before, yeah, that's going to be happening again this week, but don't worry, it's just because of the holiday and the cold snap and the bankruptcy, and it's just one time, it'll never happen again, except it's happened like 3 of the past 4 weeks. So not great for confidence, I gotta say. And it's the sort of thing that makes retailers want to say, yeah, look, if we got to open up a Lunar account, or we got the Lunar account anyway, we got to order our stuff from them to get the whole thing, let's just shift our Image order over to Lunar now. Let's just shift while we're at it, maybe we should be shifting our Titan order over to Lunar now. Maybe we should be shifting all these other ones over to Lunar now. And so that actually makes things even worse for Diamond, because not only did you piss off your biggest guys, now did you lose even the potential of selling 60-some% of the market, with DC and Image gone. Now you've lost the confidence of the people who had left over. And so then the only thing that people are going to buy from you are the things that are exclusive to you, which they do have a lot of toys. They have a lot of Funko Pops. Again, there's some nice looking toys that come out of them. We're not toy guys, so I don't personally care. So this is not my personal problem. But it's one of those things where Diamond has to be able to say, can we make the revenue situation work with our very high fixed costs and less revenue? So looking at this one, I would be saying, I don't like the odds. I mean, I'll just be flat out with the whole thing. It's, even if you knew nothing about Diamond, if you didn't even know what industry they're in, and you said, look, Company X has just entered Chapter 11. What are their chances of coming out of Chapter 11 in one piece? You say, well, 80% against, right? I mean, that's just historically the odds. But the particulars of how this situation works, I just gotta say, I don't like it. I don't have any ill will against Steve Geppi. Honestly, I have enormous respect for him. I have enormous respect for a lot of the folks who work over there. And honestly, I think it's a better industry with more distributors. I like competition in these fields because it makes everything better. The second you get a monopoly, best case, you get someone like Steve Geppi who tries to be a good steward, even though the economics rail against it. That's the best case. The worst case is you start abusing the monopoly thing and you start saying, well, how can I maximize my profit? And then you do all the things that maybe Geppi should have done. Maybe if Lunar is the only distributor left in town, then do they do the same decision that Geppi made all those years ago? Do they keep the comic companies who can only move $1,000 to $1,500 worth of product? Do they keep them in the mix, or does Joe Bob's Comics, him who is that plucky little tries hard guy, does he get a shot or doesn't he? And look, if we're just playing the money game, then you say no. Joe Bob gets punted to the curb. Come back, kid, when you're bigger. And that's hey, life's tough. What do you want? And the same thing goes for if you're a smallish comic shop or a mid-sized comic shop. Let's say you're one of the guys who like so many comic shops, 35% of your product mix tops is comics. The rest of it's board games, it's apparel, it's Funko Pops, it's whatever the hell. It's the things that keep the lights on. But of that shrinking amount that's actually comic books, if you don't have a lot of money on the whole thing, do you still keep getting a 50% margin? Well, we're already seeing scenes. We're seeing the sub-distribution deals going down and things like that, where we're already seeing indicators that the margins are going to shrink. So you won't be getting by on a 50% margin anymore. You're probably going to be getting by on like a 30 or 35% margin if you don't get cut off entirely. And yeah, it's the sort of thing that will make a lot of small and mid-sized publishers hit the mats, and it's going to make a lot of small and mid-sized comic stores hit the mats. I don't know how it can go down any other way. That being said, I've been talking for a damn long time, and you guys have had things to say, so let's go to your comments on the whole thing, because this is the advantage of a live stream. All right, so let's see here. Okay, after we get down to the weather stuff. Cold here on the north side of Franklin. D.A. Libby. Again, people are still comparing weather. Let's see here. Heroes World. I probably said wrong names all the way through the rest of this one. Okay, yes. D-Lib said, I worked for Sunrise Products and then Second Genesis, along with Bud Plant, were the major distributors in SoCal. Yeah, there were some good regional distributors once upon a time. Definitely. Hello from different places. Brian says, I've seen Diamondpack books in the past, 4 or 5 years ago, pre-COVID. I was appalled at how crappy they packed shipments. The local stores saw 3+ stores damaged on delivery. Yeah, I'm not going to argue any of that. Strange thing was Capital was a better company. I mean, you can be a better solution technically, but holy cow! Sorry, I just looked up the count of the whole thing, and we welcome everybody here. We have a lot of folks in the audience. You can be a better overall company, just like a better solution. Like if you guys cared about the technical merits of VHS or Beta is actually, if you worked at like a TV studio or cared about the image, the image or the sound quality, Beta was by far the better solution, but it didn't have the recording time built in, and so it wasn't able to be successful in the rental market. So VHS won. I mean, oftentimes there's like, you can be better on so many things, but because you're deficient on the one thing that matters, in this case, the thing that Capital is deficient on is they didn't lock down DC. And because they didn't lock down DC and they didn't have enough capital to ride out, like if somehow Capital City Distribution had 6 months of capital banked, God knows how they would have done it. But if they did, and they could have ridden that out until Marvel came crawling back, we might have had an entirely different story out of that whole thing. But yeah, it didn't work out. Let's see. Capital City bought out by Diamond 96. We're talking 25 years yet as the sole major comic distributor. Yeah, pretty much. Let's see. Let's see if I got it. So if when ComicBase goes down, will Transitions have 5 to 10 new distributors for which ComicBase is their number one buying copy of the main line every month? Yeah, there's still a lot of publishers where the one copy of every issue we buy makes you. We are now we were your most, count on us buyer of your line. So many people have called us up over the years, said like, oh, hey, I'm looking for information on this forgotten comic from the 90s. The only people who seem to have a copy are you guys. And it's yes, because we're the only people who bought at least one copy of your damn comic book, which honestly, maybe it was a work of rare and sublime brilliance, but yes, we bought it. That is a thing. Let's see. Search out Rosansky's post on Diamond's demise if you haven't seen it. I'm sure that will be colorful. I will Rosansky is nothing if not colorful. I will see if that pops up. Let's see here. There's rumors that a Canadian company is purchasing Diamond. UK might buy Diamond's North American operations as well. It might. Buyout is certainly a thing that can happen. There are, as they call it, stalking horse bidders for different things. One thing that complicates things is Diamond isn't just one company. It's like 5 companies, including things like they had a collector's grading company that it's like, wait, I've never heard of you guys. Like, and it's because they grade toys. They don't grade comic books. And so I had never heard of them. But if you ever saw like a Star Wars the play, set or whatever that thing was, if you ever seen it locked up in plastic with a grade on top of it, that might have come from the Diamond grading company division that they had. They have lots of things like that. They have the toys, they have Canadian distributors, UK distributors, there's loads of things in there, but and some of them are up in the bankruptcy. Some of them are owned by Steve Jeppy personally, and they're not. But so the company is definitely getting parted out one way or another. I mean, when companies die, it isn't like people don't pick over the bones, whether you can make the bones work again or not. It's not usually just selling the desks and furniture, because when you sell on a warehouse operation, there's usually not very interesting desks and furniture. Sometimes the most interesting things is the intellectual property or the customer lists. In this particular case, it's probably going to be, what are the lines that you guys are distributing where we can where we can make money distributing there? Or on the toys, do you guys own the molds? Do you own the actual manufacturing techniques and so forth? If you do, that might be worth money. But those things are all going to be completely different than what happens with the comics. The value add, distributing comic books is largely the ability to get them into the hands of comic retailers, and that is both, it's a logistics problem and it's an advertising problem. One thing I don't think a lot of people give enough emphasis to is what a service a publisher is actually making, or a distributor is actually doing, of getting new material in front of somebody if that person isn't known before. So you've got folks out right now, like I say, on Kickstarter, and God bless. I mean, I'm in awe of the people who have really strong social media audiences, who can take that and be Renaissance men, multi-talented people, get together with some really good people. I mean, I'm thinking of you, Ripaverse, and put out a book that gets well regarded and turn this thing into a freaking phenomenon. I mean, like, I'm in awe. I mean, just absolutely full stop. But for every Eric July and company that can make that happen, man, there's 1,000 people who would love to make that happen, who might have a product that is comparable even, but will never get in front of the people to make that happen. I mean, you see these guys at comic shows, they're hawking their book, they're doing everything they can to get that thing out there. At the end of the day, they sold 100 copies. They sold 50 copies if they begged someone at a convention, please buy my book. And the long and the short is, those guys aren't going to be able to leave their day jobs. I mean, it's not going to happen for them. And that's a shame, because again, I like rooting for the little guy. We all have our favorite bands who, the bestest thing you can ever do is been the guy who, I knew Nirvana when they're just starting out, or I knew whatever when they're just starting out, and then when they go for their third multi-platinum album, you can sit there, yeah, they're sellouts now, man. I knew them when they were authentic. But at the same time, you're secretly really proud that, like, the guy that you knew, your little discovery made it big. So we all cheer for that guy, but there has to be a pipeline for those guys to get big, right? And what distributors do is they give you a way of putting product in front of a much larger audience. And there aren't a lot of ways to do that in the comic market right now. And I think that's going to be one of the major things that drops out if Diamond drops out. So, I'm not saying good or bad, but I think that's probably right. Let's see here. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, Greg says, I think the results probably different than Diamond going away and leaving a total vacuum. Leaner likes, well, if it was a total vacuum, like if there was no distributor, we'd be host. Lunar likes infrastructure pick up all the slack. Penguin Random House probably isn't all that interested. Yeah, I gotta say, this is based on both personal experience dealing with being a Penguin Random House account, seeing how books are done, like when it's books and not comic books, how they're dealt with in, like, say, bookstores, when people get the books out the back and rack them on the shelves. I think Penguin Random House, as much as anything, is confused as hell as to why they have to carry floppy comic books. I think they kind of get the graphic novels a little bit, and the more they start looking like a traditional book, the more they get it. But when you start talking about the latest issue of Spectacular Spider-Girl, or whatever else, or the Amazing Spider-Boy, I think Penguin Random House is like, I guess if we gotta take it in order to keep the Diamond and Marvel account, I guess we'll do it. But I don't really get a sense that that's where their heart's at. So, as Brian Hibbs has said, and in which I tend to agree, and I don't know the hearts of Penguin Random House any further than the inkling they have given me so far, but I don't really get a sense that they are dying to jump in and help out really tiny publishers right now. I think any smaller than they're dealing with right now, they're probably not super into. So I wouldn't expect them to be the people who pick up the slack on this one. Let's see here. Let's see here. The Luna came from Discount Comic Book Service. Thank you for that. I knew someone in the chat would tell me what the name of the old distributor was. Xanadu Comics. Let's see. Large problem with Lunars. They're also the owners of Discount Comic Book Service, largest discounting service in direct competition with comic stores. Yep, that is true. There's a lot of problems up, down, and sideways with comics where you can sit there and say, why didn't this reach its full potential? People have lots of cross interests. I've talked about how I do not love when, say, grading companies also run pressing services. I do not love it when, but there's also problems with, like, you might well ask, why do digital comic books cost what they cost? I mean, they're like $1 less than the regular comic book. Why the hell should that be? Why are digital comic books not like, if they're not 50 cents, why aren't they $1 tops? I mean, they cost effectively $0 to distribute. You've already got the IP, you've already paid the whole thing. Why is the incremental cost of it anything more than my standard margin plus the royalty rights that'll be plus that thing? Because the distribution costs $0. There is no printing cost. There is no whatever else. Well, a big part of it is it's the digital comic book is made intentionally more expensive so as not to compromise the sale of the physical comic book. The thought being, if you compromise the sale of the physical comic book, then the comic store takes it in the neck. Now, good decision, bad decision, I'm not going to be the one who makes the decision, but there are definitely cross purposes which run when you in the comic industry, and they're everywhere. Let's see here. And then the PSAs. For once, I'm going to be brief on the PSAs on this one. Don't forget, please hit like and subscribe if this is the sort of thing you like. This is the sort of thing we do, and we hopefully will do more of it. We have the ComicBase message boards over at forums.comicbase.com. We also have a dedicated thread where you can suggest topics for live streams and so forth. And do not forget about Andre's amazing world-famous ComicBase cover catalog, TM, available at the ComicBase message boards. This is, again, if you guys didn't see it, it's insane. Just imagine what it would look like if you just took all the covers of all the world's comic books and had them in one large PDF file so you could print them. Very small, but still, it's an amazingly crazy thing to say. Oh yes, here we are. I appreciate the enthusiasm on this one. ComicBase should buy out Diamond Comic Distribution and run it better than Diamond. Just wishful thinking. Yes, I appreciate the confidence. I'm going to say that is outside of our skill set here. Oh my good lord. Is Alliance still a system company to Diamond? I don't know the answer to that one. Roger, I apologize for that one. Let's see. Let's see. So Syracuse comment says one of the big problems in Diamond being basically a monopoly is it was steered away from. It says mama pot stores, but I'm assuming you mean mom and pop stores. Mama pot stores. I think we're more of the comic, places where you'd get Soldier Fortune magazine and Playboys and stuff back when you were getting comic books in downtown Minneapolis when I was a kid. But anyway, where they got away from advertising dollars, which is a stupid move in my opinion. The poor service they provide as a lot of comic stores also led to their demise. Could not agree more. By the way, I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do this. So, in a word, what is the biggest problem with comic books today in terms of their cost? Sorry, spoilers, it's their cost. But why the hell does a comic book cost $4? Well, I just reached blindly behind me right now, and I grabbed the first comic book that was in the stack, Birds of Prey, right? And let's look at what this $4 comic book has in it in terms of advertising support, shall we? All right, let's just leaf through it together. All right, we have let's see, McFarlane Toys Digital, a DC company, so possibly a third party or probably a partnership co-sponsored ad, but okay, there might be an ad page in there which was paid for somebody other than DC. Let's keep going. All right, we get no ads, 2-page spread, no ads. We have an ad for another DC comic book. No revenue to be had there. An ad for another DC comic book. No revenue to be had there. An ad for another DC comic book. Are you seeing a pattern here? No revenue. And letters page and an backspace page for an ad for another DC comic book and a back cover for Wet another DC property. So maybe, did DC log even $1 additional through advertising in that entire issue? Maybe. And I say maybe because, okay, that was a McFarlane Toys DC Direct Line ad. But if I were McFarlane Toys, my negotiation with DC would go something like this. All right, I'm going to pay you X many dollars for the license, plus X many dollars per unit sold, with a minimum of X, of Y per period, guaranteed revenue. But in return, I want X amount of advertising dollar exposure across your related property line. At which point they say, well, gosh, you drive a hard bargain, Mr. McFarlane. But yeah, I guess we'll throw in $250,000 worth of ad buys on the whole thing, which will buy you all of, a couple inside cover ads across a DC thing for a couple months, maybe, in which case you didn't really book any revenue. So maybe, and by the way, ad pages, I got the ad, rates back from DC because I wanted to know, well, many things, but among other things, what to take to get an ad. It's $35,000 is per page, and they only sell full page ads. That's the minimum rate. It goes down in theory if you buy more than 1 month's worth. Not that I think they've ever sold more than 1 month's worth, or at least not in living memory. It took them 2 weeks to get back to me on the inquiry. And they, by the way, were the only major company that did get back to us when we inquired about ad spending on this thing. The rate card was... All right, well, if you're listening to DC, it was a joke. It was a 5-page PowerPoint deck with 1 page of a DC logo, a 1 page containing, it says we have over 1 million thingies sold. There's teen and non-teen. No breakdowns whatsoever of demographics. No breakdowns whatsoever of anything. I just said, oh yeah, there's over 1 million. Really? That's fascinating. Are there over 1 million kids comic books? Is it 20,000 people buying 50 titles? Where's that million come from? Is it 1 million different people, or is it whatever else? And then off the thing is, yeah, and by the way, it's $35,000 for a page, and we only sell full pages, which is why. And by the way, and it's not just DC. I looked at Marvels, I looked at Images, etc. No one's selling ads, which is why your $4 comic book costs as much as it does, because if your newspaper, remember newspapers? Yeah, I remember being a young newspaper boy and being told, it's like, yeah, no, if we didn't have ads, if there weren't ads supporting the newspaper, this newspaper every day, the one that cost 35 cents, would cost $6. That's the physical cost to print and distribute this thing. No, the reason this thing is $4 is because that's the physical all-in cost for them to, it's probably $2, but very close to that to print and distribute 32 pages of 4-color stuff. The ad pages that they are selling inside, I'm stunned when I see how much the ad people aren't working. I was stunned when they weren't willing to sell half-page ads and quarter-page ads a decade ago. If you guys open up a copy of Buffy the Vampire Slayer #1, you actually will see a ComicBase ad on the back cover. That's a Dark Horse, at least back in the day, had a little bit of a clue. But even back then, Marvel was not selling anything less than a full-page ad, and they weren't selling them, many of them. They sold some back in the day, but they don't sell any now, like none. And I suspect, and this only comes from knowing something of corporate accounting in general, not about knowing Marvel's corporate accounting. So if you work for Marvel corporate accounting and I'm wrong, please let me know and I will clarify. But if I am the ad sales manager at a company like, say, Warner Discovery or Marvel, which is really Disney, etc., I just care, okay, I have 5 available or 6 available ad placements. I need to sell them, right? They are worth, $170,000 or whatever else, whatever breakdown I have between what covers are worth and what the rest is. And I don't really care who I sell them to, right? It just, selling them is good, not selling them is bad. So I get measured on, did I sell them, right? Okay, so someone from the movie division comes up there and says, all right, well, yeah, we got an animated movie coming out there. So yeah, give me 2 of the inside pages for that one. I go, terrific. 2 pages, check, done. Toy division says, yeah, we got this toy hitting. Great. There's a page right there. And we got 2 other comic books selling on the whole thing. So we'll do house ads on those ones. We'll pay them out of the other division's ad budget on that one. So, okay, sold my ad pages. Great. Have I taken in one additional dime for DC Warner Discovery? No, I have not. But did they get to, did I get to claim those as income on my personal division's statement? You're damn right I did. And the income looks the same as if it was the income not as a transfer from another division of the company. It just looks like a plus on my side. Now, granted, the entire company also sees an expense on their side because they now had an ad spend from the other division that if someone else was buying the ad, but they had to spend the money somewhere. And so they think, well, hey, better spend it at home, rather than spend it with some stranger, because this way it goes to a good cause. It's people we know. It's incredibly incestuous thinking, but it all makes sense from inside the company. The only person it doesn't make sense to is it David Zaslav, the head of DC Warner Discovery or whatever, he sits there and says, wait a minute, if I sold those pages to someone outside the company, I would have more income. Whereas because I did not, I do not. But because comic print publishing is like 0.008% of my overall revenue, it's a rounding error. Who cares? So that's why I think they're doing it the way they are doing it. That being said, man, if you're running an independent comic book company and you want to actually be able to put comic books out there and sell them for $2 each and make it so that it's a kid who likes your comic book and buy it with their own money, hey, here's the trick, guys. Sell advertising. All right, sorry. All right, you're into the rant. Okay. Oh, Warren Shy, first time watcher, happy to be here. Well, we're welcome to have you, Warren. Please, thank you. Let's see. Publisher, when it became Monopoly, got too big for the britches. Comic stores and being forced to buy X amount of comics. Absolutely, yeah. Everything we've said. Let's see, and we're making fun of mama pot stores. Brian says, I miss my third-party ads. Bring back the X-ray specs, monster masks, everything non-publisher to lower the cost. Absolutely, man. It's funny. It's one of the things that I do love the facsimile editions of the latest Marvel DC books. But one of the things I love the most about it is the ads. The ads put you back in time in a way that that just second printings and things like that excerpt those ads don't. I mean, go ahead and put little lines over things marked, none of these ads apply anymore, whatever you got to do. But no, I love, I mean, those, all the ads we read as kids, we all remember all the Hostess ads, the Kool-Aid ads, and everything else. It just, bring it on, man. All right, so let's see, bring back this damn sea monkey ads. Let's see here, Fear of the Sea Monkeys. All right, so Warren says, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think too many titles have soured the pot. Every team has several titles, every character has their own book, and too much to eat up at $5 a book. Absolutely agree. We're in an attention economy, and when you spread the attention too thin, the stakes go away. It also does not help when you restart the book every 8 issues where there's a new number one, it's a new team, new direction, new whatever else. It did not help when you split the Marvel Cinematic Universe up from the regular universe. I mean, there's something being lost here, clearly. And I actually had to do some thinking about, what am I afraid of being lost in the comics market? I mean, when you talk about Diamond going out, or you talk about floppy comic books and stuff like that falling for flavor, what am I bitching about, right? I mean, I'm not one of those guys who really nostalgizes. Nostalgifies. I'm not sure what the word is. Gross nostalgic over vinyl. I mean, I'll be honest, I like CDs better than I ever liked vinyl, with one exception. I like the scale of vinyl. The idea I can pick out the art that's this big. Matter of fact, I remember as a kid, you'd go to record stores, and a lot of times, they'd give you the old posters they used in store promotions, like Musicland, stuff like that. There'd be a bin by the door of old ones that they got rid of, and so sometimes you see something really cool, like, oh, cool, Blue Oyster Cult, the Mirrors, thing had that, tacked up on my drums while I'm practicing and stuff like that. You want your things you love, you want to be as big as you can make them in your life. And so, CDs, 120 millimeters on the side, it's okay. It's, bigger 12-inch records, better, right? The problem is 12-inch records take a lot of space. I do not think fondly over all the days as a DJ, going back to the stacks and going through stack after stack of just old, moldy, records like that. I mean, it's not that charming. Comic books take too much space, all things considered. If there was a way to make them huge while you're reading them and have them shrink down instantly when you're not reading them, something very small, that'd be wonderful for me. That's almost what digital comic books do. But at the same time, you do want the artifact. You want something physical to latch onto. But yeah, with all that said, it's one thing I think that's kind of key is with things that we love is we want to be able, under our own steam, to invest in them. So in other words, like the very first comic books you ever bought, maybe your mom or dad bought them for you. Were at the store, they said, yeah, hey, you come to the store and you're a good kid. Here, you'll buy it. Here's $1. Go buy yourself some comic books or whatever the thing is. But one of the first purchases that most of us made as kids is and for me, it was when they were 25 and 30 cents, is you could take $1 that you had earned, from mowing the lawn or doing whatever you did, and you could go down the store and buy 4 comic books. And that was 3 comic books and things like that. And then hopefully your job got a little better and you could still afford to keep the things up. But that was really empowering. When records came out and it was 99 cents or so to buy a 45, and it was like $3-4 to buy, an LP, we all bought a lot of LPs and a lot of 45s back at the time. It gets weird today when things are immaterial, where you don't buy LPs, don't buy CDs, you just have a Spotify subscription if you even pay for it. But I do think when we talk about the things we love, and people I think are displacing a lot of the love that they had with comics into things like Iron Man masks from Sideshow Collectibles. We buy a lot, we buy a lot more stuff like this because the comic books or the actual esoterica that we like it doesn't have that physical form that it once did, but it's still very empowering to us to be able to buy things that connote our love for the medium. If you're a film collector, a film buff, you might really be watching all your films out of a digital collection of some sort on your Plex server or off of Netflix or Turner Classics or whatever else. But there's a decent chance if you're a real film buff, you've got a giant poster from one of the broadsheets from one of your favorite films up on your wall someplace. I mean, we've all been in those guys' house. We've all been in each other's comic dens, and we have stuff like this around. But that's just a way of saying that we love the medium. And I do think it's very important for collectors to be able to say, yeah, no, there's a way that I can use my money, not mom and dad's money, my money, to express my love for the medium. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Moving on. Okay. Variants, ads, loves for those things. I'm going to have to pack this in, guys, because I'm going very long. I hope I didn't insult everybody. Or says, hey, we just been insulted. I don't know. And I'm sure grocery stores and drugstores only devote half shelf space to things with a minimum cover price. Definitely true. Comic books, $5 cover price, well below that, or below that threshold. It's funny. If comic books moved at the rate of at the velocity that, say, bottles of Coke moved, you wouldn't have a problem stocking them at a couple bucks each. The problem is they don't. I mean, they were more popular back when they were widely available, but they weren't that popular. They didn't move like cigarettes and candy did, and so we want to find a point on the curve of being saleable into the general public where it's enough to justify their space out in the store, but it's not so precious that it ghettoifies off to the point where it's, I mean, a lot of people think that the problem with the comic book started with the idea of the comic store, which for me was a dream. It's like finally a place where I can actually find some selection of comic books. The funny thing is we now have comic stores where you still can't find any representative cross-section of comic books. Like if I'm looking for comic book X, there's basically 0% chance I'm going to find it at the local comic store unless it came out that week. Once upon a time, there was a really good chance if I liked Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos, I could walk into a good comic book store and it might have the issue I'm looking for. That is no longer the cause. But then the other problem then is that if you're not already in the club, how do you get into the club? A lot of people talked about the first time you walk into a comic book store, it's like you walk right out again because it feels too insular, it feels too clubby, and you feel like, oh, I don't feel like I belong here. And if the person doesn't be like welcome, the second you walk in the store, a lot of people just walk out. So by the way, big tip to you retailers out there: welcome the people into your store. As Frank Miller put it once in a speech, is like retailers, every time a new customer crosses in, over your threshold, think of that as that the wind has just blown $1,000 bill into your store. and it's your job to keep it in your store. So yes, be very kind to the $1,000 bill that just walked in, because when you think about that comic customer over the lifetime of them being in your store, that's kind of the sort of money that they're going to spend if you welcome it in. If you're kind of like, hey man, I'm like playing games, I'm talking on the phone, I'm hanging with my friends, you're not one of them yet. If you ignore them, expect it to walk straight out. Anyway, all right, moving on. Oh, wow. We were talking about incels somewhere along the line. Okay, moving on. All right, guys. I think we are good. Guys, this has been fun. Thank you, everyone who came. And if you like this sort of thing, please, on your way out, please hit that like and subscribe. And next time, we have so much cool stuff going on. I don't know if you guys get this feeling right now, but 2025 on any number of levels has been like, I think, good Lord, am I quoting, is it Lenin? I think might be Marx or Lenin is said, there are years when nothing happens and there's weeks when years happen. It's close to, it's a quote close to that, but I feel like 2025 is going to be lit in ways you have no idea of. And if you guys caught just how much activity there was in ComicBase land at the end of 2024, you have some idea of some of the stuff that's ahead, but it's like you guys have not seen anything yet. Well, I can't wait to be telling you all about it. All right, guys, have a good one. We'll catch you all on the next one. Bye-bye.